I'm Alex. I work for Ledger, and my job is pretty simple. My job is to build tools that help companies scale crypto businesses, right? And that's what we really want to talk to you a little bit about today. But we're halfway through the day already. I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible, and we're going to try to sensationalize this a little bit, make it a little bit of an interesting interaction, right? So the point of the talk, and actually, do I have the clicker? There we go. We're going to talk about three very simple concepts, right? We're going to talk about the what, the why, and the how. Very generic, but stay with me for a little bit. We'll dig into the details. So the what, and this is going to be the controversial piece. Let's try to think about this for a second, right? The crypto ecosystem has the opportunity to become a global financial stabilizer. That's a difficult concept to talk about right now. We've heard the news, we've read all the articles, right? The last half year has been very challenging for the crypto ecosystem. There's been a lot of events that weren't so favorable. The general perception of the industry right now is not that great, for good reason. But it's going to be fine. Let me tell you why it's going to be fine. The challenge is that over the last 6 months, a lot of the things that we've seen developing in crypto, in fact, in the last 2 months, and the team is actually having a really hard time keeping this PowerPoint updated in real time. Every time I go up to speak, I have to reintroduce myself to the latest activities. The global economy is struggling. Market complexities, globalization, and drastic concentration of risk is actually stressing the global financial systems today. They're not built for the evolution that the community is going in. Let's look at the events, right? Just over the weekend, announced that UBS takes over Credit Suisse for $3.23 billion, $5.4 billion in losses, and that was the best possible outcome. And I think this has been a big trend today. We're not going to focus too much on this because there is positive outcomes at the end of my talk. But it's important to realize that crypto is having issues and has been having issues, but in many ways, this has been a reflection of the challenges that we're seeing overall in the financial ecosystem. And a lot of the failures that we've seen in crypto over the last 6 months are failures of centralized financial institutions. They just happen to be focused on crypto. FTX is a bank for all intents and purposes. They failed because of a bank run. The most recent failure with Silicon Valley Bank, they're a bank. They failed because of a bank run, right? And we're seeing this happening again and again in the financial sector. And the very interesting thing to compare in this model is that now that Silicon Valley Bank is failing, the Wall Street Journal is writing about the impact on Circle and USDC. That wasn't happening a year ago. Right? We had $3.5 billion in assets that are backing a stablecoin locked into a centralized financial institution that went under. And one of the major financial publications in the world is writing about the crypto use case and the unpegging of the stablecoin. That's an interesting place to be for crypto today. It's a challenging place to be because we have both feet in two industries. You need the banks, right? You need the bridges from traditional finance to crypto. Those bridges haven't been fundamentally worked out yet. The infrastructure and the architecture supporting the ecosystem is still very fragile, and we're seeing massive failures in traditional finance. Complicated landscape. But Silicon Valley Bank is not going to recover. They're gone. USDC is back to the dollar peg, and will continue to function. The only real problem here is that we had to wait for the weekend because the banks were closed, right? And a major stablecoin that underpins the flow of funds in crypto trading has not been able to redeem its peg because the traditional financial system is not properly configured to accommodate follow-the-sun operational models today. That is the fundamental problem, and that needs to be solved. And at Ledger, we feel very strongly that the solution is actually coming. And it's this combination of events that makes both regulators the financial system, and the overall community of traders, retail investors, and others understand that this change has to be there. In fact, a lot of the things that the regulators are talking about isn't forbidding crypto, right? Isn't over-regulating crypto. They're just saying that, look, if DeFi is the way forward, please work with crypto assets through the new models versus trying to create intermediaries that are susceptible to the same risk as the traditional financial intermediaries today. So, how do we get to a better place in the financial ecosystem? And I think in the world, in the overall ecosystem for retail investment and retail use cases. This is an excerpt from the original white paper of Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash that would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without a financial institution in the middle. So this was the envisioned end state. We haven't gotten there. Right, so quick question maybe to the room, just to make sure we're all involved here. How many people in the room practice self-custody? Okay, it's a pretty good percentage. Now, how many people in the room understand the concept of self-custody? Quite a few more, right? So, and that's actually a pretty good representation of where the world is today. Many people understand self-custody. They just don't necessarily feel compelled to practice it. That still leaves room for intermediaries and services to be provided in that regard, which is perfectly fine. But what we need is more education on self-custody, and we need wider adoption in self-custody. And it's going in that direction. This was presented at the World Economic Forum, and you can clearly see that from a World Economic Forum perspective, right, the self-custody, while it's requiring approval from third-party approval for a third-party transaction, is very high on the innovation scale, and the industry is really starting to think about this at scale. CBDC solutions are thinking about self-custody and how to achieve inclusion, and this is driven by the MIT Media Lab. So the industry really is starting to think about self-custody as a concept, but there's certain things that need to be solved before this concept can really take hold and be leveraged at scale. One of those things is identity. Digital identity has been a huge pain point for the web world at large for a very long period of time, but there is a lot of very innovative governments, because governments currently issue identity, that are thinking about this in very interesting ways. The UAE being one of them, and I think this is going to be one of the driving factors where sovereignty starts to become a much more universal concept, and you have very innovative institutions issuing sovereignty and identity on distributed networks and on crypto networks. Once we have solutions for identity that are sufficient, we're going to continue to see the increase in adoption in retail use cases. So, self-custody, hugely important. Identity, equally as important. You put those things together, and you're going to see the trend line of retail adoption of crypto and Web3 use cases continuing to grow, and it has been doing so in parallel to the adoption rates of web so far. This puts us on the right trajectory to continue to scale the overall adoption with Web3, and there's very good reasons for us to continue on that track. There's been several presentations today that has now hopefully established in your minds that Web3 is not going away and is critical for the evolution of the digitization of value overall. Some of the use cases that are starting to come out of this. We're seeing Starbucks launching solutions for rewards models, ticketing, right, which will be based on Web3 use cases and NFTs. These are all hugely important end-user, consumer-based use cases that will drive the adoption and the scalability, and then the financial institutions will follow. In the crypto industry, I think we've kind of made a little bit of a of a misnomer, a little bit of a mistake initially, where we started with speculation. These digital assets have evolved very quickly. They have grown in scale and adoption, and they offered a very interesting opportunity for financial speculation, which there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's just been a little bit reversed. So now what we're seeing, that we've seen some of the collapse in the speculatory approaches, is wider adoption and wider pickup in utility and creation of utility use cases. And that trend is going to be critical because I think the industry forgets a little bit. Everybody asks, like, okay, when are the banks going to enter the crypto ecosystem at scale? When are they going to do the really big projects and stop messing around with POCs? When is that actually going to happen? Well, the banks are there to serve their customers. And the bank's customers are companies like Starbucks, companies like Nike, companies like Microsoft, companies like Google, right? And once those companies start to create at-scale use cases and implementations on Web3, that is when the banks are going to feel inclined to be able to support their clients. That's when those new solutions are going to be built, and that will start to drive wider adoption also in the financial space. An important prerequisite to all of those things happening is consumer protection. So the first slide that we showed with all the newspaper clippings around Bitcoin and all the challenges that we've seen with FTX, people losing their assets, hacks, inconsistencies, these are all things that are a direct outcome of a lack of consumer protection models in a relatively emerging industry, which has been crypto. We need to solve for that. If we can fundamentally solve for consumer protection in crypto, that will continue to drive adoption, and that will continue to evolve the industry as a whole. At Ledger, this is our most critical objective, is to bring consumer protection to the crypto ecosystem. So how do we do that? So now I'm going to pause a little bit and focus on Ledger and what we do. We have two types of solutions at Ledger. One side, which we're best known for, is the retail solution that focuses on hardware wallets. Hardware wallets solve two very simple problems. How do I protect my keys on a secure device? And how do I see exactly the transaction that I am signing with my keys as I sign it? What that does is creates a secure environment for your keys and removes any possibility of a man-in-the-middle attack, of any spoofing attack, because as you're using those keys to sign a transaction, you're doing everything on a single secure device, with a secure screen, with a secure operating system. That was a very difficult problem to solve, but we solved that problem 8 years ago, and since then, we sold over 6 million devices. We secure close to 20% of all crypto assets on the hardware wallets, so quite a few people are practicing self-custody, which is a great sign. And we secure over 30% of NFTs that have value. Now, the slightly lesser known part of Ledger, which is the part that I'm responsible for, so we're trying to fix that, is Ledger Enterprise. What we do with Ledger Enterprise is actually very simple. We empower other companies to do what Ledger does on the retail side. We want everybody else in the ecosystem to build secure, crypto-enabled use cases for retail audiences at scale, leveraging self-custody. And not a lot of companies today know how to do that. So we have quite a lot of work to do, both on the education side, on the tooling side, and on the product side. We have hundreds of clients today. We have billions in annualized turnover. We secure billions in assets on an ongoing basis. And the platform itself, the solution, and the governance layer have never been compromised from a security perspective, nor from an operational perspective. So there's been 0 events of a loss of funds, and we've been doing this for about 4 years now. When you look at those two components together, self-custody and security on the consumer side, self-custody, security, governance, compliance on the enterprise side, and you increase adoption on the corporate side, you're going to drastically increase adoption on the consumer side. Because what the consumer really wants is use cases, is utility. They want value. And that value will be created by the innovative companies, both new companies that are going to be crypto native, and existing companies that are the major brands and the major consumer relations people today. That all comes together and creates the dynamic that we're looking for. So what is a journey for a company to enter into Web3? It's a very simple journey with very complicated pieces. The industry is emerging constantly. So there's new layer ones, new DeFi protocols, new sets of NFTs, new use cases, new communities are constantly evolving. Crypto has been a very difficult industry to follow. So you can imagine if you're a brand like Louis Vuitton that's been around for hundreds of years, and you're entering into this space, it is a very difficult landscape. So what we do is we support their transition. Step number one, education. Your team and your business has to understand the concepts of Web3, has to understand the concepts of crypto. And these are very new and very difficult concepts. Second step, security. This is very important for both financial use cases and utility use cases with NFTs. On the financial side, if you're managing your company's money, or even worse, if you're managing somebody else's money, you have to have security on crypto networks. That is their number one priority, because as we know, hacks are paramount. If you're executing NFT use cases, and you're dealing with communities, and you're distributing value to communities of users that trust in your brand, you're actually putting your brand equity on the line. And in many cases, the brand equity that's been developed, the trust that's been built between some of these brands and their customers, is worth a lot more than the assets themselves. And if you don't invest in securing the smart contract, in securing the interaction with those smart contracts, and in securing the NFTs that you're distributing to your communities, you fail in that, your brand is compromised. The trust is gone, hundreds of years of brand investments evaporate. Now, you don't want to do that. Security, very important. And you need a Web3 strategy. There's a lot of players out there that are helping and supporting companies in Web3 strategy where they're building the tooling, right? That's what we focus on, that's what we bring to the table. Now, what happens once you're ready to go? You've built your first Web3 solution, you're managing your treasury, your stuff is educated, you can take in crypto, you can buy crypto, you can sell crypto, you have an operational budget in Ethereum, you're ready to launch. You need to make your offer available to the public. There needs to be a secure and clear distribution channel, right, between your internal operations as a company and your community. You need to engage with your community. You need to build the right web presence, the right experience. You need to make sure that your community is properly educated on security, self-custody, and the concept of Web3, right, to participate in this securely and not get spammed or spoofed. And you need to be able to explore new opportunities, right, because this is going to continue to evolve. The landscape is never stable. We're never standing still. Fundamentally, what Ledger does is create a security and governance layer and a tooling layer that supports every step of this journey. And we work with partners to be able to provide the right advisory capabilities, the right variety of use cases. But at the core, we build security, governance, and tooling. And all those things enable an organization to go from step 1 to step 6 and have very successful use cases in Web3. So how do we do that? Super simple, right? There is a bit to unpack here, right? So I'm not going to finish on this. I'm not going to leave you guys on this. But a lot of components, there's a lot of complexity that goes into a very successful execution in Web3. Please come talk to us about this. We'll be more than happy to unpack it for you. This is an evolution of investment over 6 years of time in hardware, firmware, software, security at the core. This has been built over a period of years. There's a lot there. There's a lot that's involved, and we'd be happy to work with you to better understand all the different points of the platform and the capabilities that we bring to market. So let's recap. First, self-custody, distribution of risk. To the edges. The original promise of crypto is that every single user, every single participant on the network can hold their own value without having to depend on an intermediary. That is not a necessity, it's not a prerequisite, but it's a choice. It's a freedom that changes the dynamic, and it's a critical dynamic, and that dynamic will only be true with wider adoption of self-custody. Secure global identity, critical for scalability. And then, obviously, the utility and the adoption of the use cases. We need to make Web3 use cases attractive and valuable to the users so we continue to gain adoption and the entire industry scales. If all of those things get checked, if we check the box on these together, the opportunity is to have a global economy that the user base can trust, right? So it starts with retail use cases, retail value with utility, and will transition and translate into financial ecosystem security and financial stability, because these things will force the financial ecosystem to operate on a global level, on a 24/7 cycle, change the operating model, and drive the adoption of crypto overall.